So I've been in the building all day. Jake Tapper just arrived after doing a show. So thank you for...
In a van.
Rushing in,
in the hotel parking lot. Yeah.
TV, you look so fancy.
Glamorous.
And yeah, our folks said, well, Jake Tapper is actually doing a show from a van, but it looks really nice. Thank you all for coming here. And Jake, appreciate you doing this again. We talked during the show, and then you whisked off and did your TV show. Let's talk about Race Against Terror, and then we'll talk about CNN in this moment and your interesting conversations with the president. But Race Against Terror. Who's heard about Jake and the president? Okay, we'll get there.
We can start with that if you want, just to get it out of the way. Do you want to talk about?
No. I want to keep people here.
Okay.
So let's do
you think they're here
first.
just to hear the story?
And then, yeah.
President Trump called me when I was at the gym. That's the little teaser, and then we'll finish that later.
Yes, and we'll get there. At the center of this story, Race Against Terror, is an ambush of American soldiers in Afghanistan, 2003, April of 2003. And it's also the story of a man accused of being part of this attack, al-Qaeda operative. Briefly, what happened with that ambush?
So it's April 2003 in a little place called Firebase Shkin, right near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border on the western side. And it's just a small group of soldiers that are there. And just to remind you, in 2003, if you're in Afghanistan in 2003, you enlisted before 9/11. So whatever your perception of what the forces might be like in 2003, it was a lot of people who joined the military because it seemed like a career, a safe career. For some of them, it was ways to like get out of trouble, learn some discipline. Mm-hmm. So they're there, and their basic assignment is insurgents are coming across the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Keep an eye on them. And as happened all the time in Afghanistan, the presence of the Americans there to keep an eye on the insurgents made the Americans targets for the insurgents. And one day there was one of the CIA operatives, or everybody thought he was a CIA operative. He had a beard. His name was John. Nobody knew who he was. And he came in and said that an aerial drone had picked up some insurgents. So the Americans went out to look for these insurgents, and they got ambushed. And 2 Americans were killed, an airman from Arizona named Ray Lozano, and a Native American kid, when I say kid, he was 19, from Oklahoma, named Jared Dennis. Those 2 were killed. 4 Americans were seriously wounded, will never fight again, was seriously wounded. And it was a horrible day, and a day that probably, certainly not me, I never heard of when it happened.
Yeah.
I
hadn't either. Your book kind of does some deep reporting on this, the ambush, and then a man accused of being on the other side, right? It's al-Qaeda operative. He went by the name, still alive, Spin Ghul. And a lot of this book is about American prosecutors, people in the government trying to chase Spin Ghul down, bring him to the U.S., make a case to prosecute him, etc. So a lot of detail here. But tell us about Spin Ghul, how he found his way to al-Qaeda.
One of the great things in my research was that the prosecutors who brought this case, and the case of Spin Ghul is the only case in American history of a foreign terrorist prosecuted in an American criminal court with killing American service members in a battlefield. It had never happened before, and it has not happened since. And that meant, though, that there was just a trove of information in the court records, one of which was a very long, detailed confession by Spin Ghul when he was picked up. And Spin Ghul's story starts as a story of a lot of extremists and criminals start, with a young man with really no discernible future, and kind of drifting and no plans. His parents were from Niger. They had made a pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia and then never left. They basically led lives of indentured servitude in Saudi Arabia. And Spin Ghul in the 90s was raised hearing about the Mujahideen, these heroic jihadi fighters who defeated the Soviets in Afghanistan with our help, and fought the Russians in Chechnya. And these were his, you know, these were his, I'm trying to think, I'm a Philadelphian and I'm trying to come up with a boss. These were his Tom Brady's, right? These were his heroes. These were his legends. I was going to say Bill Buckner, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't want to start a whole thing.
She's not leaving till tomorrow. Right?
So then, you know, he didn't really have anything to do, and he was recruited by a guy who worked for the Saudi government. And he ended up at a camp in Afghanistan, again, before 9/11, learning how to shoot, learning how to explode. And you know, that's the kind of life of you could imagine that's probably going on right now in Idaho, right? In some way or another. Not Islamic terrorists, but some other kind of extremist.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sorry, as you say, as you're right, he finds himself in this kind of famous al-Qaeda training camp where other terrorists who went and do things were training. And what's interesting is, and actually Stephen has a photo of him, maybe we can kind of put him up at some point to look at his photo. He was eventually identified.
Yeah, that's Spin Ghul. Yeah,
there he is. Yeah, and as you tell the story, he eventually is identified by an Italian police officer, I believe. Right, he's on a boat crossing the Mediterranean, and this I find interesting. It's near the start of your book. He proudly declares, "I killed American soldiers in Afghanistan." He came out and he said it, and many times. I mean, he's quite the character. What strikes you about him, kind of coming out and saying that?
So he was picked up on a cruise ship that Berlusconi, the prime minister of Italy at the time, during the Arab Spring of 2011, commandeered because so many refugees were fleeing Libya and Tunisia. And they were just getting these rickety boats, sometimes drowning on their way, and going to the southern Italian islands, which, if you look at a map, they're closer to Africa than they are to Rome. And, you know, practically overnight, these Italian islands would double, triple, quadruple in population with refugees. So in order to alleviate that issue, it was a real issue. Like the UN Commissioner for Refugees, Angelina Jolie, went to these southern Italian islands to bring attention to the issue. And Spin Ghul ends up on this boat and asks an Italian Green Beret for some water. He gives it to him and then asks why he has a bullet scar on his arm. He says, "I'm in al-Qaeda. I was fighting Americans in Afghanistan. I don't belong with these refugees. I'm al-Qaeda." He's very proud of it. And that's how all of this begins. He had been there because during the Arab Spring, this is before Gaddafi was killed, Gaddafi gave the order for all the prisons to be emptied, to create havoc in the streets of Libya, but also to send Islamist extremists to Europe to wreak havoc on Europe. And that's how it all happened. Now, the question of why was he so stupidly honest about who he was.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple reasons. One, he had just gotten out of prison.
Right. He'd been in a prison in Libya for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Or so.
And tortured and the like. So he might not have been thinking clearly. But secondarily, I think he was very proud of it. I think he was proud of what he did. David Bitcower, who is the assistant U.S. attorney who first told me this story, he once, when he was at Yale, he once interviewed Ron Darling. Ron Darling, they know his name in New Jersey and New York a little better than they know him in Boston. But Ron, well, you probably know it because
pitcher for
he
the
beat
Mets.
You guys in the World Series. But Ron Darling was one of the pitchers with the New York Mets who beat the Boston Red Sox. Sorry, and but he was.
You got to stop saying that.
He's a legendary. I know, it's just the Philadelphian in me. That he was a legendary pitcher. But when Bitcower interviewed him for the Yale Daily News in like '92, all Bitcower wanted to know about was this no-hitter that Ron Darling had pitched when he was at Yale. against St. John's. And Bitcower told me, and this is not in the book because the editor wouldn't let me put it in, but Bitcower told me that talking to like Spin Ghul about his adventures in terrorism was like talking to Ron Darling about his no-hitter in college. He was so proud of it. He remembered every single detail. He could talk for 2 days about it. And that's just part of who he was. He was very proud of what he did. I mean, obviously I'm not. I think it's disgusting what he did. But, you know, that's how he thinks about it, in the same way, and I'm not comparing the two, but in the same way that an American service member who fought abroad might have lots of war stories to tell himself.
Yeah, yeah. One kind of legal rabbit hole here. I mean, the story goes into a lot of detail about American prosecutors trying to work the case. And as you write, they had to pull an inside straight. A lot of things had to happen for them to do it. Fascinating detail. But one legal piece that's important is that it was important at the time to prosecute Spin Ghul not in a military court, but in a U.S. criminal court. Why is that important?
So it was important to the Italians, who by 2011 were completely fed up with the United States and how we were conducting our so-called global war on terror. The Italians, you know, a lot of our European friends were very upset at how President Bush prosecuted the war on terror, whether it was the war in Iraq, all of it, or labeling terrorists enemy combatants, sending them to Guantanamo, enhanced interrogation, which the rest of the world calls torture, extraordinary rendition, which the rest of the world calls kidnapping. All of that was very upsetting. And yes, by 2011, Obama was president, but in the same way that we don't necessarily change our general perspective of France based on whether it's Macron or Mitterrand that's running that country, you just think it's France. That's generally the same thing how people think of us. So the Italians would not turn him over unless he was going to be tried in a criminal court. And also the death penalty had to be off the table. Now, also, Obama was president, and Obama wanted to start trying terrorists in criminal court. And he obviously wasn't going to send anybody to Guantanamo anymore, any terrorists to Guantanamo anymore, which, by the way, has been the policy since he did that. I mean, neither Trump nor Biden reopened Gitmo to terrorists. So that's still the policy. But in any case, that was why. So the criminal court was the only option, or the Italians said, we can only hold him for a little bit and we're just going to put him in a refugee camp. He hasn't done anything to us. And the Americans knew that a refugee camp in Italy is zero security. People stay in that refugee camp because they're getting food and clothing and shelter. And Spin Ghul would easily escape and then pursue his life's ambition to kill as many Americans as possible. So the Americans were faced with this choice: prove a case against this guy for things he says he did that there's no evidence for, or let him escape and risk that he's going to kill a bunch of Americans.
Yeah. I would just kind of step back, ask a question one of the persons in your book asked. We talked about this in the radio interview. One of the siblings of the Americans killed is just the idea of prosecuting a warfighter. I mean, why is this is a war. So how do you even think about whether someone did something illegal fighting a war? Isn't that just how war is?
It's a question. So Jared Dennis, who I told you about, the 19-year-old, his sister Jillian Dennis, when the prosecutors came and talked to their family in Oklahoma, said, why is this even illegal? They were fighting a war, as you just noted. And it's a perfectly legitimate question. And it is one that worried the prosecutors at the time, because obviously Spin Ghul, once he got to the U.S., got some really good defense attorneys. And I mean, there are people all over the country, but especially in Manhattan, that are there to defend the worst of the worst, because they believe that our system only works if there are people like that doing that job. And I agree with them. Melody Wells, who was one of the prosecutors at the time, when she heard Gillian Dennis ask this question, she thought to herself, we're going to have to deal with this, because if the defense is any good and the defense lawyers were great, they're going to try to apply the rules of war and the law of war, and there are laws of war. And Spin Ghul and the defense at that point was trying to get, or they got, an expert witness named Colonel Fracht. And Colonel Fracht, who had defended Gitmo detainees, was ready for an argument. And the argument was Spin Ghul only attacked soldiers. He didn't attack any civilians. He had conspired to blow up the embassy in Nigeria, but A, that's a separate thing, and B, he didn't succeed. B, he used weapons of war that you're allowed to use. Like, there are certain weapons you're not allowed to use. Nerve gas. There are weapons you're not allowed to use, but he had used.
So the argument is he did war the right way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he did. He was abiding by the protocols. He did not take shelter embedding or hiding among civilians. So Fracht was going to argue he should be covered by the laws of war. The ultimate question is does al-Qaeda qualify for that? And that's for a judge to decide. And the argument against it is those laws apply to states and state forces, countries, uniformed soldiers. They do not apply to a terrorist group or any, if you could call them a militia or whatever you want to call it, a group that has no affiliation with a country, is not an official armed force, and does not wear a uniform. So that would be the argument. And the book goes into a lot of these debates, but also, more to the point of the investigation, most of the book is about the sleuthing. Most of the book's about the investigation, the detective work by the prosecutors and by the FBI agents and others, because when I first heard this story, that's what I found so fascinating. That's what I thought was so interesting, because I don't know about you guys, but I love, CSI and Law and Order and Criminal Minds and all those shows about how they catch bad guys. And this was that, except true, and also on an international scale, and also about a terrorist who confessed to his crimes.
Yeah. If you read the book, there's a lot of CSI in it. A lot of fingerprint stuff, a lot of great detail. I want to connect this question of, the prosecuting in criminal court to, and how that's relevant today, as you write. There's a lot of controversy back then, right? Question of, was this a good idea? And in Congress, they talked about whether we wanted these alleged terrorists on American soil. Now there's a case now, right, of a key suspect in the Suicide bombing in Afghanistan during the chaotic withdrawal of the Americans back in 2021, killed 13 American soldiers. Now the plan, right, is to bring this accused person to the U.S.
Oh, he's here.
Oh, he's here.
He's in Virginia
to be tried in a criminal court. And Stephen, I think we have a clip of the president talking about this, just to show how supportive the body politics is of this.
Killed 13 American service members and countless others in the Abbey Gate bombing during the disastrous and incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan. Not that they were withdrawing, it was the way they withdrew. Perhaps the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. Tonight I am pleased to announce that we have just apprehended the top terrorist responsible for that atrocity, and he is right now on his way here to face the swift sword of American justice.
So that was March 5th, President Trump's address to Congress. Thank you, Stephen, for that. Is it now kind of an accepted way of thinking about it, these alleged terrorists, let's think about them first being prosecuted in criminal court?
So it's a great question. So Jafar is the name of the terrorist that is now sitting in a prison in Alexandria, Virginia, awaiting trial. And what is so fascinating to me about that news, I told you Spin Ghul was the first and only prosecuted terrorist in a criminal court for killing service members abroad, service members on a battlefield. Jafar will be the second if it happens. So when Obama tried to do this in 2011, 2012, and the book traces the court case, which starts in 2011 and ends in, I don't think I'm spoiling anything for you, in Spin Ghul's sentencing in 2018. It happens during the Trump administration, but almost just coincidentally, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General at the time, is not in favor of it. He doesn't stop it because the horse has already left the barn. The trial is 2017, but there was such political opposition to the effort to bring terrorists to the United States for criminal trial. To this day, Spin Ghul, the only one tried for killing service members abroad. There has only been one Gitmo detainee brought to the U.S. and tried in a criminal court. Only one. His name was Golani, and this is in the book because it had an impact. He was in Gitmo. He was tried for his role in the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And before trial, the judge threw out the best witness against Golani because the U.S. had only learned this witness's name while Golani was being tortured by the CIA at a black site. So Golani was acquitted of 284 out of 285 charges against him for killing all those innocent people in the embassies. So when that happened...
Because the evidence was not admissible?
Because the main best evidence was deemed not admissible by the judge. And I believe that the jury convicted him on one account because they knew we don't want him walking the street. So we're going to charge him for we're going to agree on this one. But that's just supposition. But when that happened, the effort the Obama effort, I think it was in 2010 that happened. When that happened, the Obama effort to bring terrorists to the U.S. for criminal prosecution died. That was it, because it was so close to him being found not guilty completely. There already was so much fear. It's hard to remember it, but you guys were touched by 9/11 too. I guess planes took off from here, and then you guys had the Boston Marathon bombing. I was here covering that for a couple weeks, so you know what it's like. New Yorkers probably at that point, maybe more so a little bit, but everybody was still scared. And this idea that these bad guys, these horrible guys, that they were going to be brought to Manhattan. What happens if they're found not guilty? But beyond that, there was an irrational fear of these people, almost as if they were endowed with superhuman powers, that they were going to come and they were going to break out of prison and they were going to kill people in the streets by shooting lasers out of their fingers. You know, it was that kind of irrational fear. The political hurdles to get any of these people tried in a criminal court were impossible. But now, Trump just announces it. I don't think he has any idea. I doubt anybody said to him, this was really politically risky 10 years ago.
Yeah.
He probably was just like, who cares? You know, whatever. Not one peep, not one person said anything about, like, how can you bring this horrible terrorist to our shores? Like, how can you put him in a jail cell in Virginia? But it's happening. So I guess we have evolved and come to some sort of understanding. But I will say it is still very rare for these people to be tried in criminal court. And we still have 15 detainees at Gitmo.
I have one more question on the book, and then we'll move on to other things. And, you know, please send your questions, slido.com, #Tapper. Actually, there's an audience question now. Let's do that. The rule of law is embedded in the DNA of the United States. Why do we seem to struggle with these types of criminals in U.S. courts?
So it's a great question. There are a number of reasons. One of them is that the decisions that were made by the Bush administration right after 9/11, creating an alternate system of, it's not really law, but an alternate system of justice, let's call it, to fight the war on terror. And that created systems that created evidence that could not be used in our criminal court of law, because we don't accept, as Americans, people in this country being tortured before they confess. And in fact, There's a guy named George Toscas who served in the National Security Division of the Justice Department. He'd been there since 1993. I want to talk about him in a second because one of the concerns I have about how the Trump administration is waging the war on terror, even if they are following this example that I think works of trying terrorists in criminal court, is how much they are sidelining experts because they're not perceived as loyal to the president. But in any case, George Toscas in 2003, 2004 was trying a case against some Hutu murderers who had killed a bunch of Westerners in 1999, and they had confessed to the police in Rwanda, and then the judge found out that the Rwandan police had been with the rival Tutsi clan and had been tortured throughout all of the confession. And those Hutu murderers who killed a bunch of Westerners, including 2 Intel executives from Oregon, they walked and they were sent to Australia. They're free men in Australia right now. So that's the problem. When we have systems outside the United States, whether it's CIA operatives or our allies in other countries who don't have the same rules that we do, it cannot stand up in a court of law in this country.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating. I want to, this part of me I've gone back to a couple times. This is from Renly. Renly's a sibling of Jared, is that right?
Renly's the little brother of Jared Dennis.
Younger brother of Jared, who's one of the American soldiers who died. And this is what Renly said in court addressing Spin Ghul. I will not join you in your cyclical hatred. This is Renly. I will not give in to your systemic terrorism with hatred and anger. You may have caused my pain, but Jared caused my forgiveness. Because of Jared, I say to you that I hold no ill will towards you. My goodness.
I know. I mean, that's one of the things about running books like this is you meet people and you hear stories that just stun you. Renly Dennis, who, he's such a special guy. He sent me the other day a photograph of my book on his brother's grave. Anyway, Renly read a book. He just picked up a book at the Antlers, Oklahoma Barnes & Noble called You Cannot Have My Hate. It was a book written by a Frenchman whose partner and the mother of his child was killed in the ISIS attack on the Bataclan in Paris, France, in, I think, 2014. And the book was based on a Facebook post that this man had written forgiving the ISIS terrorists who killed his wife and saying he was not going to spend his life hating them because she was so special and he was just not going to submit to that pain and that hatred. And Renly read that book and then typed out his victim statement. When there's a trial after somebody's been convicted, before sentencing, victims get to give a statement. And 2 of the service members and Renly spoke. And Renly said that and gave this amazing speech about forgiveness. And it was just so moving. The judge had to go to chambers and collect himself before he sentenced Spin Ghul.
Yeah. One more audience question on this. To what extent is the domestic terrorism in the United States similar in its training and organization to that of al-Qaeda?
I think it's very similar. I mean, it's not motivated by obviously Islamic extremist beliefs. It might be motivated by nihilism. It might be motivated by left-wing or right-wing beliefs, Christian nationalism, whatever. But I think it's very similar in the sense of disaffected young men find a cause, find a group to recruit and train, and a sense of grandiosity. All of these people, whether it's the killer of Charlie Kirk or Luigi Mangione, who killed the United Healthcare executive, or Spin Ghul, they all have this sense of their place in history. It's one of the reasons I try as a newsman to say their names as seldom as possible in a broadcast. But I think it's very similar. I mean, and at the end of the day, Spin Ghul is now in the same Supermax where
Boston Marathon bomber.
Yeah, but not just Islamic extremists. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. Ted Kaczynski's just died, so not him, but
Timothy
McVeigh's partner, Terry Nichols. Yeah, he's there. McVeigh was executed,
and
but
the Olympic 96 Olympics.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys are all in this same kind of Con Air Supermax, and they're all just horrible people motivated by sickness.
Okay, talking about you as the newsman, in your conversations with the president in the last couple days. So yesterday, is that right? He calls you.
Yes.
To talk about Gaza. A couple weeks back, you have this text message back. It's all on your phone. You're a TV guy. You're doing this all on your phone.
Yeah.
Text message back and forth with the president about the Mideast and the shutdown. Can I just say this sounds crazy?
It sounds crazy. So I will say this, and I told you this earlier on Here and Now, the great show Here and Now.
Say that again.
Don't forget to donate. So I and all my friends and family will attest that I text way too much. Part of it is because I can no longer post anything on social media without 1,000 bots attacking me. But part of it is also, I don't know, I'm just wired that way. So I am constantly...
Oh, we were just talking before it came out about too much coffee.
Right.
So
I was just told by my doctor that I had to stop drinking coffee after noon.
That's what you're texting. Yeah.
Maybe that's part of it. Maybe, and booze also. Two things I'm cutting down on. So maybe a lot less texting, perhaps. But in any case, I do text a lot, and I text public officials all the time. If I have their number, I text them, and some of them write right back, and some of them don't. Your governor sometimes writes back to me, sometimes she doesn't. And on and on and on. Governor Newsom, maybe it's like a 1 in 10 response rate. But Governor Shapiro, whatever. I'm always, first of all, as a anchor of a daily 2-hour show, and then I co-host with Dana Bash, a Sunday show, I need guests, right? I need guests. Yeah. And so I'm constantly just staying in touch with people to have a relationship with them, to try to get them as a guest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So President Trump has not given me an interview since 2016. Maybe some of you remember it. This is how long ago it was. They had just named the judge for the Trump University trial. Does that ring a bell? Okay. That's how long ago it was. So, I know you date yourself with legal cases against the president. So that's how far back this was. So, and it was a judge from Indiana named Judge Curiel, and he was of Mexican heritage. And the president had said to the Wall Street Journal that day that Curiel couldn't do his job because he's a Mexican. So I did an interview with the president, and the main point of it was I wanted to get to the point where, and he's very good at, who's it, Gordie Howe? Who's your incredible goalie? Never mind.
He was not the goalie.
He was not a goalie. Okay. Again,
Tim. I'm not from here. Tim, who's the goaltender?
The legendary...
Tim Thomas.
I'd never heard that name before. Anyway, I'm not a hockey guy. But anyway, he's really good at just stopping questions. So that's my only point. He filibusters, he changes the subject, he weaves, whatever. You're all familiar. But I knew I wanted to get to the question, if you're saying somebody can't do the job because of their race, isn't that the definition of racism? That was the question. And it took me 27 bobs and weaves before I got there. And that was the last time I interviewed the president. So in any case, I do have his number. I got it last year just through industriousness. And every now and then I'll text him. And he never writes back. He never responds, anything. And yes, all the security questions about a president having a cell phone, all of it, of course. But a couple weeks ago, I said something. I said congratulations on the Mideast, on the ceasefire deal. And then my big question is always the same thing, which is, what are you going to do if Hamas doesn't lay down its arms? Because that's point 6 of the 20-point plan, and it's a little bit easier said than done, right? And then Hamas will lay down its arms. Okay. So I asked, and he texted me back, and then I texted him back, and then went back and forth, and then I just reported it on State of the Union. And then it became like a thing, not necessarily a positive thing. Anyway, this time I sent him a text. It was the morning after, it was Tuesday. It was the hostages had just gotten out. And I said, congratulations on the hostages getting out. I don't know. I have his number. So I'm at the gym like an hour and a half later, and I'm just walking by my phone because I'm old and I'm on my way to get some water, and the phone rings, and I figure it's probably like my wife or my daughter, and it says President Trump, and I'm like, what? Anyway, it's not like it happens a lot. So I'm like running around. I'm looking for a pen and a pad in a gym, in a Gold's gym. I run to the new membership table. I grab a pen, and I'm just looking for paper, while he's just talking. He's talking about Hamas, and I'm just like, what the fuck, And he actually said something that he contradicted today, which yesterday he told me, because I said, they're killing people in the streets of Gaza, Hamas. By the way, just because I've mentioned Hamas so much, that doesn't mean I think that this, I get it, like Israel, Netanyahu, IDF, I get it's a complicated thing. But that to me is the next hurdle in the 20-point plan. Anyway, yesterday he said that he thought they were killing criminals, but today he said something like, Hamas, stop the killing or we're going to go in there and get you, or something like that. Anyway, my only point is finally I grab a cardboard new member thing that's sitting up on the desk. And I just put it down and I start writing on the back of it, just like anything he says to me. And then he gets off the phone and I have an interview, but I have to finish my workout. But I mean, it's not like a plan.
The secret journalistic methods. Here we are.
But at the end, I'm like, can we do this on TV sometime? Can I actually do an interview? It's been 9 years.
And he said,
I'll think about it. Give me a call next week.
All right, this administration.
I don't hate the player, hate the game. You know what I mean? This is not the, my parents are divorced, and I always say to people I didn't ask for that. I'm just trying to live with it. That's how I feel about all this.
The hand we're dealt, right? Well, this administration it's made things more challenging for mainstream news organizations. The White House has brought in more conservative news organization, used to be White House correspondent. Pentagon this week.
Not just more conservative news. They've brought in crazy people who who post things
That's
that
the
are
better
not,
word. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean the conservative is oh God, I don't know. Okay, the Weekly Standard was the Dispatch. That's conservative. They're bringing in conspiracy theorists,
and they're there and they're asking these questions at the briefings, as we know. The Pentagon, right, has just required anyone with a Pentagon badge. They're not allowed to report information that hasn't been authorized. And then most of the people accredited there, right, they said, no, we won't do it. I guess the question is this a real setback for covering this administration, holding leaders accountable? Or does it maybe not really matter if you're in the building?
Well, first of all, I looked into the Pentagon rules because they've been working on them and updating them. And so the final rules, it used to be the thing you couldn't report anything unless the Pentagon signed off on it. It used to be that. That's not actually... Oh. No, it's worse. What it was is you have to basically agree that soliciting information at the Pentagon is criminal and could get you labeled a security risk. And they're not just talking about classified material. They're talking about other material too. this stuff called it's called CIU, and hold on, let me look it up, because I just sent because I kept saying that too, that it was because that was an old, not old, like 3 days ago.
More restrictive.
Yeah.
More restrictive. Yeah.
Thing about what
Anybody calling you by chance? Yeah.
So it's CUI, controlled unclassified information. So, and they're also saying, asking for that, including just putting on your Twitter page tips, welcome here, and putting in, that counts as breaking the law. That counts as, it's not covered by the First Amendment, the Pentagon says. CUI, controlled unclassified information, that's not classified information. It's just stuff they're trying to control, which, if you know the Pentagon, is everything. So
sensitive, unclassified information.
It's just a complete violation of the First Amendment, and they're asking journalists to agree to it. And it's just like, no, we're not going to agree to it. It's actually worse than what they had before, although because it's so much more confusing, it's
right. So many Pentagon correspondents, including NPR's Tom Bowman, said, "I'm not signing it. I'm turning in my badge." What do you think it means? For reporters' ability to cover the Pentagon. They've got their sources. They've got their phones. Does it really matter if you're in the building?
I will say yes. And the reason I say yes is the following. Now, I have written 2 books about war without the Pentagon helping at all. It's, in fact, how this whole book project got started, when I was complaining about the Pentagon, and one of the prosecutors said, "Tell me about it," because he then had to prove a case with the Pentagon not helping at all. But no, because you meet people at the Pentagon and you get their numbers, and probably you wouldn't have the conversation at the Pentagon. So yeah, no, it's the same thing as the White House not having a credential at the White House. Yeah, you don't have to work at the White House, but people have to walk in and out of the building, and you can see people there, and you can ask them questions.
Yeah.
Capitol, I was a congressional correspondent for some time, and that's like the greatest gig in the world, because they're all just walking all over the place.
Yeah, I did that.
There are no secret entrances or anything, So, I think it's without question a war on the press, and chilling, and the Pentagon one is imposed by the only Secretary of Defense in history to accidentally tell a reporter about pending attack plans on an unsecure signal chat. So my message to him might be, the problem isn't the reporters in the Pentagon. The problem is you're showing off on Signal and not even knowing who's on that Signal chat, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah. Speaking of covering the president, your previous book also came out this year, Original Sin, you co-wrote with Alex Thompson on President Biden's health issues in 2024, and, were they covered up by Team Biden? Now, of course, Kamala Harris, Biden's VP, who lost, we know, has a new book on this question of his health and whether he should have run, with this notable quote. We've seen it. It's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. So we have that, and then we have a clip of Pete Buttigieg, the Transportation Secretary, in the Biden administration, recently saying this on Meet the Press. Stephen, please.
He should not have run. And if he had made that decision sooner, we might have been better off. But it literally was his decision. Nobody else was able to make that decision. And now in front of us, we're confronted with the decisions that come next.
So much to ask you about, but and they're confirming this, the obvious question is, why didn't anyone in the room raise their hand a little earlier?
It's a great question. I read Kamala Harris's book, by the way, 107 Days, and it's interesting. It's an interesting book. I recommend it. Not before my book, but I do recommend it. And that's a harsh quote in it. She also has, she has some pretty harsh stuff to say about a lot of people, but she also says, at one point that, I mean, she confirmed a ton that was in my book and Alex's book. But beyond that, she also says that, you know, she just states matter-of-factly that Joe Biden was not up for the rigors of running for president in 2024. Why didn't people say anything? That's such a great and complicated question. The main reason is because of the fear of Donald Trump getting elected. That was the main reason. And because of that fear, if you think that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the United States, you can, and you're President Biden, and you think you're the only one that can beat him, you can pretty much justify anything. And I think that President Biden had also removed from his inner circle anybody who would say this is a bad idea. And the Democratic Party at this point had been kind of cut off from him after Republicans took over the House in 2022. Members of the House weren't really regularly called to the White House. And I think there's just a reluctance to challenge your own party, your own president, your own teammates that we see all the time. You know, Vice President J.D. Vance wouldn't criticize these young Republicans, and by young, I mean under 40, who had this horrible text chat that maybe you've seen in Politico where they're saying all sorts of racist, anti-Semitic, sexist things. And J.D. Vance wouldn't criticize it because the guy running for Attorney General in Virginia had said some horrible things in a text chat 2 or 3 years ago, and no Democrats have called for him to step down as a candidate. I mean, whatever. People can justify whatever they want for not criticizing their own side. But I think the fear, and there were people that said things, but they weren't listened to. Dean Phillips, who ran for president, congressman from Minnesota. There were columns. Mark Leibovich wrote for The Atlantic, and Maureen Dowd wrote for The New York Times, and David Ignatius wrote for The Washington Post, and Bill Maher called him Ruth Bader Biden in like August 2023. I mean, there were people, polls indicated that voters were very concerned, including Democratic voters, were very concerned about his age and acuity. So why didn't anybody say anything? Because he had decided he was running. And the fear was to say anything publicly would only be helping Donald Trump. And that became the mantra. And when, look at what happened to Robert Hur, the special counsel who was assigned to investigate Biden's mishandling of classified information, which he had done, which he had mishandled, as had Trump. And Trump's was worse. But Hur's charge was Biden, and he just concluded after 5 hours of interviewing President Biden in October 2023, basically he saw what we all saw at the debate, which is a guy, as Hur put it, somebody who seemed like a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Yeah. Robert Hur said that, and he was just dragged through the coals. Attacked Kamala Harris, attacked him as unprofessional.
Yeah.
And, there was a real price for it, a real cost for it.
So here you talk about this, and I guess leading up to my last question here, I think about conversation I had 2011. I went to Japan after the tsunami. And the question, of course, then is, why didn't anyone at the power plant think something like this could happen? And there's a management professor there who'd been in much of the world, and he said, this is humanity. This is the same thing as Enron, according to him, the same thing as 2008, Lehman Brothers. Just when you have a group of people and it's too insular, something about the nature of people just kind of leads to this, and people who would otherwise raise their hand, they kind of don't. I mean, in news organizations, any organizations, do you see this example of Biden kind of the same way?
Yeah, I mean, it's playing out right now with the current occupant of the White House. I mean, who says things that seem bizarre all the time, and nobody says anything. The most you can get is, the Speaker of the House, somebody will say, do you have any reaction to the president posting a racist sombrero meme in the middle of the government shutdown? And the most you'll get is Speaker Johnson saying, I tell my friend Hakeem, don't pay attention to the noise, don't pay attention to the noise. That's as harsh a criticism as you'll get.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is something in the nature. Look, it's not fun to be dragged. I can tell you, as somebody who's a journalist and gets dragged on the reg, it's not enjoyable. I'm sure it would be much more fun for me as a journalist if I had a team, But the truth is, I don't. Like, Democrats and Republicans all view me vaguely. I mean, Trump won't give me an interview, but neither will Mamdani, So it's not as though it's not easy, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so there was a Wall Street Journal story in June 2024 before the debate, and it was two reporters, Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes, and they wrote a story called, it was something like Behind Closed Doors, Biden Shows Signs of Slipping. Now, they interviewed a bunch of people for their article who wouldn't go on the record and wouldn't even go on background. But we had in our book a lot of the same reporting. It's just we had it from people who it was, Biden had lost already. Well, he dropped out already, and Kamala had lost already. So they were a little bit more willing, to be honest about what happened, even though they're still not putting their names on it. But anyway, Siobhan and Annie got raked through the coals, attacked by MSNBC, attacked by Democratic politicians who 1 month later would be privately telling Joe Biden's top aides that he needed to drop out. Those same people a month before were posting attacks on these journalists on Twitter. So I think
that you're undermining our candidate here. Was that the
No, that would be at least honest. It was, these people didn't include my quotes that I gave them. This is shoddy journalism. It was these are unprofessional. It was the same things with the Robert Hur attacks. And the truth is that a lot of people also don't want to hear it, right? Because maybe they feel, I mean, people still say it that they would take Joe Biden any day of the week, no matter what his condition, over Donald Trump. And I understand the sentiment, but you guess what? It's not up to you. It was up to the voters, and he was losing the election before the debate because of that reason, and the economy and the border. But there were a lot of people, and it might seem crazy to people at a WBUR event in Boston, but there are a lot of people or if not a lot, enough in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin who said, well, this guy can't even speak. This guy, at least I know he has the energy to be president. And I get it. I understand that doesn't make any sense policy-wise. It doesn't make any sense that people voted for Obama twice and Trump 3 times. It still happens. And we call them swing voters. And, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to people to vote for Obama and then Trump, but it just is what it is.
Final question from our audience. Journalism in America is under attack from all sides. It is a turning point in the history of the free press. What gives you hope?
So, oh boy. Well, the turnout here is nice. Thank you. What gives me hope? What gives me hope is, well, let me tell you what I'm scared of first, and then I'll tell you what gives me hope, because it's going to take me a little longer to come up with the positive. I'm mainly concerned about 2 things right now in journalism. Three things. Sorry, they keep coming. You want a reassuring answer, and I'll get there, I promise. Okay, the first thing I'm worried about is I'm worried about people siloing themselves in information that reaffirms only that which confirms their beliefs. And I have members of my family that are in different silos. Not my immediate family, I should state. My wife and my kids we're cool. But there's a member of my family who, doesn't understand why I even interview Republicans. And I say, Dad, they run the country. And then somebody else in my family is in the whole Joe Rogan sphere and will constantly call my wife and tell her what I'm up to, which, I don't want to blame this on Joe Rogan. It's not Joe Rogan, but it's that whole manosphere of stuff. I'm cool with Rogan. Nobody report that I'm bashing Rogan because it's not him. But, did you know Jake did this? Did you know Jake did that? Did you know? And it's usually wrong. It's always wrong. Sometimes there's a kernel of truth. But in any case, the siloing is really bad because there's always a place for partisan media. Always. The country was founded on ideological media. My favorite journalist in American history, Benjamin Franklin Bache, ran a paper that was anti-federalist, and he lambasted George Washington and John Adams. I love it. But it can't be your primary source of information. NPR, CNN, New York Times, Boston Globe, these are places that try to be fair and balanced and try to get it right. So that's one. I'm going through it's just one of three reasons I'm scared. Okay, so that's one. Two, the oligarchs taking over the media terrifies me. And it has not affected me yet, but I don't know how long I'm going to be untouched by it. And then third, we need to reach you guys where you are. And increasingly, you are here and looking at your phone. And we need to figure out how we reach you because our boss at CNN figured out how to transfer the New York Times from a newspaper company with a website to a thriving digital property with a newspaper, and hopefully he can do that for CNN. Okay, what gives me hope? What gives me hope is I still believe at the end of the day, most of this country wants true and accurate information. I think right now we are being fed by people who have commodified the desire for lies or reaffirming beliefs. We're being fed a lot of that because it's lucrative to be it's lucrative to be Fox. They're lucrative. It makes a lot of money, and they have a very solid fan base, and they're being told that what they're told is that's being reported is fair and balanced, but it's not. It is preaching to the choir. And there are left-wing versions of that too. And the algorithms in our phones and on social media, they're feeding us division and they're feeding us hate. But I know that's not most of us. I know it's not most of us. And so that keeps me inspired. And I just think that the big brains have to figure out how do we cut through the commodification and the rage tweets and all that, and how to and get to most of the American people, because I think most of them are where everybody in this room is.
Yeah. Jake Tapper, his book is Race Against Terror. Please join me
in
thanking him. Thanks so much. Yep.
How about another round of applause for Jake Tapper?